Welcome back to Crime in the Courtroom, everyone. Your twice monthly webcast covering crime in the United States, its impact on our society, and the expertise that is required in the response to and prevention of all forms of violent crime and property crime that happen on our streets, in our neighborhoods, and in our communities and businesses. Thank you for joining me. John Collins here with you. And I first want to begin by sincerely thanking Sarah Chu at the Perlmutter Center in New York and Caitlin Burchell with NBC in Connecticut for joining me on the webcast for two really interesting conversations that we got a lot of good feedback on. In episode 85, I spoke with Sarah Chu about post-conviction advocacy and the role that forensic science plays in cases that are later overturned. And in episode 86, I had a conversation with Caitlin Burchell about her life and career as an investigative reporter, during which we also touched on the investigation that Caitlin and her team completed in regards to the controversies surrounding the very well-known forensic expert, Dr. Henry Lee. If you haven't had a chance to listen to or watch those episodes, please do so. I think you'll be glad you did. Today is St. Patrick's Day, March 17, 2025. Happy St. Patty's Day to everyone out there. And yes, I am aware, for those of you that are not watching this on YouTube, that I am not wearing any green. And there is a technical reason for that, and that is because we use a green screen to show the courtroom that is behind me. So if I was to wear a green shirt or a green tie or a green coat, that would cause some unsightly technical problems that I would deservedly be ridiculed for. So you're going to have to go with the blue sport coat, the lavender shirt, and the blue tie. And I suspect there will be many an evening celebration involving the consumption of a lot of green food dye. So please be careful, obviously, when you're out there, and don't be afraid or embarrassed to make that important call to a family member or friend to give you a ride home if you've had a bit too much to drink. I'm going solo today to respond to an important audience email that I received some time ago, and I felt that I didn't want to wait any longer to answer it. And that email was from a prosecutor who wanted to know how much forensic laboratory accreditation can or should be trusted to prevent scandals, or I suppose other major failures that require the significant outlay of public resources to clean up. So I'll be discussing that with you in just a few moments. But first, I want to again thank my good friends at Promega, host of the International Symposium on Human Identification, the largest conference in existence that is dedicated to the practice, challenges, and opportunities of forensic DNA testing. For over 45 years, Promega has been helping scientists find the answers. Going beyond a focus on products, at Promega, we bring a network of diverse ideas and solutions to drive better results, not only for our criminal justice system, but to protect and preserve our quality of life through the practice of life science. Promega, turning questions into discoveries. Learn more at www.promega.com. And for information about our upcoming symposium later this year, please visit ishinews.com. That's ishinews.com. I have a quick Critical Victories news item for you, and I'm very grateful to be able to share this with you. I just returned from the Louisiana State Police Training Academy facility in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where we hosted a live delivery of our Advanced Expert Witnessing workshop. It went very well, very nice group of people, all of them forensic laboratory professionals. And although we have an online version of Advanced Expert Witnessing, the live version gets really high marks in our feedback ratings, as does our online version, but it's always exciting for me to be able to interact directly with live participants and get that kind of reaction. So we had a total of 21 participants in last week's event. The capacity is 25, and the final complete cross-tabulation or tabulated average of all of the feedback scores was 9.6 out of 10. 9.6 out of 10. So thank you again to my friends in Baton Rouge for allowing me to come and spend a day with you. And as I mentioned during the class, I am a student with you. I learn so much every time I host a workshop, and last week was no exception. For those of you that are interested, the next live workshop we have on schedule will be in Albuquerque, New Mexico on May 13th and 14th. That's actually closed for the Albuquerque folks in Albuquerque. We also have our online version that will run from June 2nd to June 5th. So if you're interested in the online class, please visit criticalvictories.com/forensic. criticalvictories.com/forensic for more information and to register right away if you'd like to. Early this year and toward the end of last year, I made some comments about the situation that has been unfolding in Colorado with regards to the Yvonne Woods investigation. Woods was a DNA analyst at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, CBI, who was found to have engaged in a variety of acts of misconduct. And I want to disclose, in the interest of transparency, that I have had CBI employees attend training workshops that I have done, and I have colleagues at the CBI that I interact with at professional conferences and who I hold in high regard and I keep pleasant professional relationships with. And I know that this has been a very challenging time for them and the entire agency, and I have no doubt that they are going to be successful in doing their due diligence to address these matters, but it is a uniquely challenging situation to clean up a mess that occurs in a forensic science laboratory because you can't unring that bell. Once it happens, damage is done on some level, and it is very expensive and time-consuming to clean up, which, by the way, is why it is better to invest the resources that are needed to prevent these kinds of things from happening instead of having to respond to them when they've already happened. Before I get into the email that I received, which is the inspiration for this episode today, I want to read an excerpt from a recent article by CBS News. And this was from the 22nd of January. A former Colorado Bureau of Investigation DNA analyst has been criminally charged over a year after CBI officials first learned about possibly mishandled or manipulated evidence. Yvonne Missy Woods, 64, has been charged with over 100 separate charges related to forgery, perjury, attempting to influence a public servant, and cybercrime. She'll be tried in Jefferson County Court and was booked into the Jefferson County Jail on a $50,000 bond Tuesday, court records show. In addition to the CBI's internal investigation, the agency also asked the South Dakota Division of Criminal Investigation to conduct an outside investigation. On Tuesday, CBI also said it hired a Wisconsin-based consulting firm to assess CBI's forensic services and operations. So that was from January 22nd, and there hasn't been much news on the CBI situation since then, so it's reasonable to assume that corrective action is taking place, and we'll know more once official reports and data are released from those investigations. Now, I want to read the email that I received about a month and a half ago, which is related to the CBI investigation, but also has significance on a broader scale. Again, this is an email from an audience member who specifically wished to remain anonymous. Dear Mr. Collins, I am a prosecuting attorney with significant experience in working with experts from our state forensic laboratory. I am concerned about recent lab failures, such as the one in Colorado involving Yvonne Woods. When such failures happen in accredited laboratories, to what degree should we expect accreditation to prevent major failures or misconduct? And when they do happen in an accredited laboratory, what is it about accreditation that allows the error or misconduct to happen anyway? What is the point of accreditation if these kinds of things can happen under the radar? I would appreciate hearing your thoughts on this. Okay, so obviously a very fair question, and it requires us to have some understanding about forensic laboratory accreditation and what it can do and what it can't do. And I'm also going to share an observation of my own that I think may be causing a problem in forensic science accreditation. So first, accreditation is granted to forensic science laboratories by private organizations who base their accreditation on standards that are internationally accepted. Accreditation is not a government program or a government regulation of any sort. It's a private enterprise that forensic laboratories pay for. But in order to be accredited, each forensic laboratory has to demonstrate conformance to the appropriate standards. And so there are off-site inspections of documents and records, and there are on-site inspections of the facilities and interviews of scientists and laboratory managers, and of course, reviews of scientists' casework and things like that to some degree. So it's not an easy process, and it requires a lot of effort on the part of forensic laboratories to become accredited and, of course, remain accredited. And then after receiving an award of accreditation, with only a few exceptions, this award remains active for 4 years. So that's forensic laboratory accreditation in a nutshell. And I will include links to in the program notes to the two main accrediting bodies in forensic science for those who may be interested in that. One of the reasons that the Yvonne Woods case is so troubling is that it occurred in an accredited, respected state-operated forensic laboratory. Therefore, this is a different kind of scenario than what we saw in, for example, the Annie Dookhan and Sonia Farrat cases in Massachusetts. The Annie Dookhan case in particular was one of the most significant forensic science scandals in history, possibly the most significant in history. But because the CBI laboratory where Yvonne Woods was employed was in fact accredited, it invites much larger public policy questions and considerations that need to be confronted. And so the email I shared with you is relevant because so many criminal justice professionals, such as prosecutors, defenders, judges, and juries, depend on a laboratory's accreditation as a sign that the laboratory can be trusted. And again, in the interest of transparency, I want to read an excerpt from a major article I co-authored in 2009, which was titled "The Wrongful Conviction of Forensic Science." Here's what we wrote about accreditation in that article. Critics have argued that accreditation cannot be trusted because it calls for laboratories to be inspected by other forensic experts, a kind of self-regulation that is incapable of providing the oversight necessary to ensure that laboratories are held to account. What this argument does not take into account is what the authors term the economy of accreditation, where a pool of specially trained and monitored assessors have a strong incentive to be brutally thorough and objective during their inspection of a laboratory. The very reputations of the assessors, the likelihood that they will be allowed to participate in future inspections, and the desire to make good use of their valuable time, usually requiring several days away from home and work, are all compromised by failing to conduct a comprehensive and rigorous inspection. It is this economy of incentives that ensures the effectiveness of professional peer-based accreditation. But peer assessors also have another incentive to hold a laboratory accountable for compliance to accreditation standards. A laboratory that fails to do good work damages the reputation, fairly or not, of everyone who calls themselves a forensic scientist. No competent and thoughtful assessor is willing to tolerate that. Okay, when my colleague Jay Jarvis and I wrote that article, forensic science as an occupation was being heavily criticized by activists in the Innocence Network, and those criticisms were often very unfair. Not all of them, but many of them were, and caused a lot of unnecessary and I think unjustified damage to the reputations of forensic science professionals all across the United States who are doing really good work. It was our opinion when we wrote that article that accreditation was a very valuable and worthwhile enterprise that helped to minimize as much as humanly possible the chance that an error or unintentional act of nonconformance would happen during actual casework, or what we might describe as professional malpractice. But we now have a different kind of a problem. What happens when we are dealing with a catastrophic failure that rises above malpractice in its level of severity, but instead is misconduct? In other words, there is a perpetrator who knows exactly what he or she is doing, but is doing it anyway. And as he or she is engaging in this misconduct, he or she might even be covering up the evidence that would allow the misconduct to be detected. Does accreditation have an answer for that? While accreditation might be an excellent framework in which to prevent malpractice, does it or can it prevent misconduct? And that's a very important question. The short answer is perhaps yes, accreditation can prevent and detect misconduct. And I think it would be very safe to speculate that without accreditation, acts of misconduct would be more widespread and more of an endemic problem, especially in the era of drug legalization and opioid addiction, which has led to more than one forensic scientist being arrested for tampering with evidence and consuming drugs submitted to their laboratories. Accreditation, without question, will make it much harder for someone to get away with this. And so that kind of behavior is rendered much less likely to happen because of accreditation. And I don't think that that's even in dispute. There are three problems that I think forensic science laboratories need to be very alert to and prepared to address in its recruitment and hiring practices as well as its human resource management practices. And one of these I discuss in my book, HR Management in the Forensic Science Laboratory, which I'll refer to in just a moment. So first of all, there are two kinds of people who are less likely to be dissuaded from misconduct simply because they work in a forensic science laboratory. The first is a person who is suffering from an addiction to a controlled substance. If we have a laboratory employee who is an addict, all bets are off. They will lie, they will steal drugs from secured storage, they will cover their tracks, and it will be very difficult to know it's even happening. Random drug testing is one of the ways that this can be mitigated, but there are some privacy issues and some collective bargaining challenges if your laboratory has unionized employees and operates under one or more collective bargaining agreements. And I should add here that completely random drug screenings may be insufficient and probably are. Laboratories should consider formulating a whistleblower provision that allows individuals who are suspected of having a problem to be screened. And this makes sense because employees know each other, usually pretty well, and will often be able to tell if something is amiss or if an employee might have an addiction of some sort. Okay, so preventing the adverse effects of substance addictions is a major priority if we want to minimize the chance of misconduct. For those of you who have my book, HR Management in the Forensic Science Laboratory, you can refer to chapter 18 on mental and emotional health for some thoughts on random drug screening. The second kind of person who is less likely to be dissuaded from misconduct by accreditation policies and procedures are individuals with various degrees of what is called antisocial personality disorder, or APD, and narcissistic personality disorder, NPD, which are very different disorders but can have some similarities in their presentations. In fact, in looking really carefully at both the Annie Dukin case out of Massachusetts as well as the Yvonne Woods case out of Colorado, the complete disregard for professional ethics and proper procedure, and the complete disregard for the fact that any reasonable person would have regarded their behaviors as likely to cause great harm to the criminal justice system and to the lives of the defendants in the affected cases suggests the presence of some kind of pathology that was contributing to those behaviors. And so the next question you have to ask is, did any of Annie's or Yvonne's co-workers detect any kind of serious behavioral issues that perhaps made these individuals especially intimidating, perhaps quite difficult to work with, or perhaps these individuals tended to isolate themselves from others, which made it more difficult for others to detect what was going on. We know that in the Annie Dukin case out of Massachusetts, there were employees who stepped in to advise supervisors of what was going on. And even then, reports are that nothing was done right away. As far as the Woods case in Colorado, I don't have any information to speculate on what might have been going on there, and speculation would be unhelpful anyway. With regards to antisocial personality disorder, this is a disorder having a constellation of symptoms that include what forensic psychologists might describe as sociopathic or psychopathic behaviors or tendencies, both of which include the complete or limited ability of individuals to empathize with others, the inability or limited ability to recognize and adhere to standards of conduct, to correctly read people and their moods, to read social situations and social cues, and to simply sense what's going on among the people around them. These are individuals who can be and often are described as complete dumpster fires. They can be very manipulative and very parasitic in latching on to certain people and holding on for dear life because their impulsivity and their poor decision making create major challenges for them in navigating their environments. Now, there's some good news here in that it can sometimes be easy to detect that these people have some pretty serious challenges. And during an investigation into misconduct, coworkers of these individuals will often say things like, he or she just gave me the creeps, or I knew there was something wrong with this person, but I just couldn't figure out what it was. And so people with antisocial personality disorder will often send out signals to people that cause suspicion, and that's a good thing. Other times, however, with antisocial traits, or people with antisocial traits may have become very skilled at masking their underlying disorder. They get good at it through manipulation and other coping strategies. So every case is unique, but it's important to be aware of this. Narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, is more troubling in some ways because it's often harder to detect. And we should point out that narcissistic personality disorder is not the same as arrogance. People can be very arrogant and offensive in their display of arrogance without having a clinical diagnosable case of NPD. In fact, people with NPD can be very charming, very smart, very capable, and they may present themselves as very confident and very reliable and very trustworthy. Their narcissism likely originated during childhood by very serious insecurities that could have both environmental or physiological causes or a combination of the two. But the point here is that narcissists will do anything they possibly can to validate their ongoing portrayal of themselves as being superior to everyone else and being without flaw and without weakness. And if that means the narcissist has to engage in misconduct to keep her or his bubble from being punctured, then he or she will do it. Now, this is probably a good place to mention that I am not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm trained and I practice as a professional coach, which is a completely different kind of occupation with different kinds of goals in mind for clients that coaches work with. But an important part of being an above average coach, which I strive to be, is having a functional understanding of certain mental health and behavioral problems, which is important because they often render a coaching client completely uncoachable. And in the 13 years since I was formally trained as a coach, I've only had to let go of one client because I knew there were serious mental health challenges that were going to prevent me from helping that person. Now, it is here that I also have to acknowledge the ways in which extreme emotional stress can mimic actual mental or behavior pathologies. So this will be helpful for those of you who work in forensic science laboratories or anyone who cares about the performance of forensic science laboratories. So about 60% of my clients are forensic laboratory scientists, managers, or directors. And every client who works with me takes a very reliable personality assessment. It's considered the gold standard as far as personality analysis is concerned. The old Myers-Briggs personality type is very useful, but it's no longer considered the most scientifically robust of the personality assessments. Two of the dimensions of personality that we study are called conscientiousness and neuroticism. And I'm just going to use these as a couple of examples. And how we can use these traits, among others, to assess a person's vulnerability to succumbing to temptation, which is what we're talking about here. Conscientiousness, for example, can be described as one's sense of responsibility and willingness to do what needs to be done to meet those responsibilities. Neuroticism is a vulnerability to negative emotions such as fear, guilt, shame, and things like that. Those of you who've attended my True Integrity workshop know about this already, so this will be a bit of a review for you. So, although there's no way to predict using personality analysis, you can't predict who will or who will not engage in misconduct. If we encounter a client, however, with very high levels of conscientiousness, let's say, and very low levels of neuroticism, it is going to get my attention. And here's why. A person with very high levels of conscientiousness recognize that the work they are doing is very, very important and it needs to get done. The evidence needs to be worked. The investigators and trial attorneys need the forensic results. The courts need the forensic results. And this, of course, is healthy thinking for a forensic science professional because it serves the public interest. But if that same person scores unusually low in neuroticism, this means that the negative emotions that might tend to dissuade a healthy person from engaging in misconduct may not be there to the degree that they exist on average in other people. So despite the stigma of the word neuroticism has some benefits, one of which is the self-regulating impact on chosen behaviors. So regardless of what a person's personality profile looks like, we expect that honorable, ethical people, generally speaking, will attach negative emotions and negative outcomes to unethical or immoral behavior, and so they don't do it. They self-regulate. But when that self-regulating mechanism is not there or is especially weak, that individual is vulnerable to being overcome by any feelings of stress that might arise from feeling unable to keep up with the work or feeling that the work being done isn't of value anymore because it's taking so darn long to complete it. I just think that we have so much evidence that when forensic scientists feel that they cannot keep up with the work that's coming into the laboratory, some, not all, but some may experience emotional stresses that inflame or motivate the conscientious side of their personalities. But if they lack the self-regulating influences that attach negative emotions to the consideration of improper behaviors, then you have a potential for misconduct to occur. And when it occurs for the first time, a laboratory may never know it. And in the study of ethics, it's generally understood that crossing the barrier into misconduct for the first time makes future instances of misconduct more likely. So then you have a serial offender, to put it one way. So what does this mean for accreditation of forensic science laboratories? Well, look, accreditation is really good for the prevention of malpractice or minimizing the chance of malpractice. It is not as effective in preventing misconduct or preventing cultural declines in a laboratory that could one day enable misconduct or make misconduct more likely. I've had my own concerns about accreditation in that it has no real substantive ability to regulate culture. You could have laboratories staffed with really good people, very competent people, and you can have scientifically valid methods that a laboratory uses in casework. But if you get, let's say, a new unit supervisor or a new director or a new system director who is toxic or incompetent, you might see a degradation of the laboratory's culture that is quite dangerous, but cannot necessarily be detected or remediated by accreditation alone or the watchful eyes of accreditation authorities. Worse than that, of course, if you have someone in the laboratory who suffers from a substance addiction, or has major mental or behavioral challenges, as we've talked about here, the laboratory and its customers could potentially be exposed to threats that might go undetected for long periods of time. For you forensic laboratory professionals out there, I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to present some solutions, and I'd like to start there. I'd like to first encourage you to think about three important things as ways to minimize or hopefully eliminate the problems that we're discussing here. First, have a really good and robust set of drug screening policies and procedures. And they cannot, in my opinion, be simply random in their application. Second, if you don't have a specific policy and procedure that encourages whistleblowing and protects people who come forward to blow the whistle on what they believe might be something serious that's going on in the laboratory, then you'd be wise to develop one and make sure that it's carefully reviewed by your HR managers and any other authorities that are representing you and your organization. Finally, and this can really apply to any organization or any occupation out there, always be on the lookout for people with high levels of responsibility or authority who also seem to take no sincere interest in other people. And even when they try to, it seems kind of awkward or manufactured in some way. Narcissists, sociopaths, and psychopaths do not care about others, except for utilitarian reasons. They use people. They will not ask you about things that are going on in they will not ask about things going on in your life or other people's lives. And they don't take an interest in what other people think or feel. And they have no functional sensitivity to the life experiences of other people or what they're feeling. When you interview them for jobs, you have a better chance of screening them out by paying close attention to their socialization abilities, their ability to engage well in casual conversations, and creating moments that give them the opportunity to ask nuanced questions or to demonstrate their ability to sense what other people might think or feel in certain situations. In other words, create conversational moments that test the candidate's ability to empathize, okay, and sense the interpersonal nuances that come with basic socialization. If you are one of these laboratories, by the way, that has its hands tied by its own HR department or its own civil service reps who tie your hands with rigid, scripted interview questions, then you are exposed to great risk, and you should push against those restrictions to the extent that you can do so legally and professionally. Never, never, never tolerate being hamstrung by inflexible HR or civil service requirements that prevent you from finding, evaluating, and selecting the unique kinds of people who are well suited for the unique challenges of forensic science. If you focus on those three things, starting right now, and if you also happen to be accredited or are going to be accredited or in the process of earning your accreditation, then the likelihood of catastrophic misconduct will be minimized to a significant degree. It can't be eliminated 100%, but it can be minimized to a significant degree. Reach out to me if you feel like you need some help, but in the meantime, take a look at the policies and procedures that you have in place and make sure that you've protected your laboratory, your employees, and your lab's customers from the threats that we've talked about today. It's very much worth the effort. And I would ask you to also please keep an eye open for our next episode where I'm going to do a follow-up to the one you just heard or watched. I'm going to make a very specific, I guess what we would call high-level policy recommendation to criminal jurisdictions everywhere in the United States that if adopted, in my opinion, would eliminate the unusual stresses and pressures that come to bear on the shoulders of forensic laboratory scientists from having high levels of service demand that exceed laboratory capacity, and which in turn create temptations for vulnerable forensic laboratory employees. And if you aren't subscribed to receive our program notes after each episode, go to criticalvictories.com. That's criticalvictories.com, and you can click the subscribe link. Thanks for joining me, everyone, and we will see you next time. Take care.